Misty has always been known as one of the most iconic sidekick characters that had joined Ash on his journeys. But one thing that made Misty unique compared to other characters is that this character was relatively fleshed out, and was one of the few characters to see some level of personal growth throughout the series. And with how well this character is memorable, Misty also has the reputation of being a character that was ruined in just a few swift and poor decisions. And no, it's not at the end of Johto where you think a character would have its entire story arc just thrown away. Now, Misty's arc is very interesting because this character grew from a place of conflict and developed into a strong female role who went from this type of character who was constantly living in the shadows of other characters like Ash or her own sisters to becoming an independent character who had gone through a lot of personal growth along the way, becoming more mature, more open, and more loyal to her companions. And while she started off as this character who presumptively was so adamant and obsessed with getting a new bike, and then developed into this character who was very lighthearted and friendly and loyal to her friends and Pokemon, not many other characters from the Pokemon anime have that same level of development. We even later on get to see a softer side of Misty when she becomes the maternal trainer to Togepi, and throughout the more and more journeys that she accompanied Ash and others on, the more her character actually developed, where her personality, still being consistent with the story itself, grew a lot throughout her entire arc in the early seasons of the Pokemon anime. It wasn't until the end of the Johto era where they decided to write the character off in favor of bringing in newcomer May, who of course was based off of her video game counterpart, and also with Hoenn serving as this semi-soft reboot to the show, the decision to dump Misty was made. Misty's final episode as a regular on the show would be in Pokemon Gold and Silver's Master Quest episode 157, Gotta Catch You Later, in which as Ash, Brock, and Misty are traveling back through Kanto, Misty gets the call that her sisters won a beauty contest and she has to now take over the gym. It's actually a pretty abrupt turn of events, but ultimately this episode actually is a very crucial episode in Misty's journey and is probably the last great episode that really Misty's story as a character. Nurse Joy actually gives Misty her old bike, now fully repaired and looking as good as new, all the way back from early on in the series when she first joined up with Ash. And Ash, being pleased that he no longer owes Misty a bike, accidentally insinuates that Misty had only been traveling alongside her because she wanted her debt of a bike to be paid back. Misty gets mad, she runs off, and then she's faced off against some thugs, but she stands up to them on her own, showing that she is capable in standing on her own 2 feet as an independent character, but also later on Ash and Brock join up and support her, also showing that Ash has grown as a character and had that same loyalty that Misty has had all of these years, and also in a way attesting to the fact that Ash has grown as a character because of his journeys alongside Misty. They defeat the thugs, and then we get to one of the saddest moments in the entire anime where Ash, Brock, and Misty all head off in their own separate ways. I remember watching this episode when I was a kid. Now, we already knew that this would actually end up happening and Misty would be leaving the show just because they had already shown a teaser of the Ruby and Sapphire series that obviously didn't have Misty in it, but it still didn't make the episode any less sad, and it was a very bittersweet episode. And from there, while Misty departs about halfway through the episode, Ash goes on, he deals with Team Rocket, he remembers his friends, he meets up with Tracy, and then he abandons all his Pokemon. That's a whole different thing. And while that's the end of Misty's tenure as a regular character in the series, we did get to see more of Misty's character. And matter of fact, Misty's character continued to be an influential character and a well-written character for quite a while, even after the departure. While the 3rd generation of the television series did do some weird things in the direction of Ash's character, drastically changing his personality in itself, there still were subtle nods and acknowledgements to his previous journeys, showing that there was still some significance to those journeys that he had alongside Misty and Brock. Even in the Jirachi Wishmaker movie, Ash can't help but to allude to Misty, who serves as this dynamic character underlining Ash's own personal growth, and it was one of the highlights of dialogue in the movie, as subtle as it was. this. It just showed that this character's influence continues to live on despite the fact that the character herself wasn't in the show. Now, not everyone remembers the television series Pokémon Chronicles. It was a spin-off series of the original Pokémon anime, but it had really weird releases in the US where it was picked up by a network, then not shown, and then picked up by another network, and eventually it was shown a few years after it was shown in Europe. As a pretty big Pokemon fan who was 11 years old, I did order these online on eBay back in the day just to find out my DVD player was region locked and I couldn't watch it until I later got a computer that I could watch them on. But nonetheless, Pokemon Chronicles was a series of anthology type episodes that focused on various side characters from the series and kind of checked in on them to see what they're up to. Now, there's actually 4 episodes dedicated to Misty and then a couple episodes here and there dedicated to other characters, but it was really interesting as 2 of the episodes follow both Brock and Misty on their journeys right after they parted ways with Ash, which feels like a pretty significant part of the story that never really made it into the regular rotation of the television series. While Brock pretty much just checks in at home, sees his Onix evolved, and sees that his brothers and siblings are doing okay, and then heads off to go meet up with Ash again, Misty's story arc is a little bit different. We see her really struggle in becoming the gym leader and bringing the gym back up into its own proper standings. Those thugs from the last episode show up again, and she has a Gyarados that she has to try to get under control, which gives Misty this arc of self-doubt and questioning whether or not she even has what it takes to be a gym leader, but realizes that her journeys and experience pay off and that she can be brave in a very scary situation, and she is able to tame the Gyarados. We then see other little story arcs of her really becoming the gym leader, having to get gym badges, and there were a couple filler episodes that weren't as good, but still nonetheless, we had a really interesting arc involving Misty that would have been really interesting almost if they could have just done a spin-off series following Misty instead, because the stories that were told in that direction were still pretty decent. But then we get to the big shift that completely ruined the character through and through. That would be episode 44 and 45 of Advanced Generations, the Princess and the Togepi, and a Togepi Mirage. This is the episode where Misty rejoins with Ash, Brock, and meets May and Max for the first time, and what should be an exciting throwback episode bringing back this character that had been so iconic for years turned into one of the most puzzling episode arcs that we've ever seen, and it doesn't make any sense. Now, let's already note, the big climax of this 2-part special is the fact that Misty's Togepi finally evolves into Togetic, and mind you, Togetic is one of the only Pokemon of the entire 2nd gen not to have an episode featuring it at this point. So this was the first time this Pokemon even made a debut in the television series. But just in general, the way they handled this whole episode was completely bizarre. Instead of focusing in on Misty and the interactions with Misty, Ash, and Brock, they immediately jump the shark going to this Mirage type island. Apparently there's this festival for Togepi in the Mirage Kingdom, in this weird kingdom that's somewhere in the Hoenn region or something. The Togepi are worshipped, and there's a princess. There's this colonel guy who's working with Team Rocket, and there's a king and a queen. A lot of weird stuff happens. The colonel overthrows the king, sends him to jail, and then he takes over. But then Ash, May, Misty, and their Pokemon start fighting back. They get attacked, and Togepi uses Safeguard to protect everyone, and thus evolves into Togetic. Misty uses her new Gyarados, which is pretty awesome, and just then after Togepi evolves into Togetic, after years and years of fans waiting, Togetic decides to stay and protect this mysterious Togepi paradise, and Misty ends up leaving Togetic behind and also leaves all of her friends behind, heading back to Cerulean City aboard a Zeppelin. Okay, where to even begin with this episode? I don't know. You know, for the fact that Misty had already been written off the show, it would have made more sense for this episode involving Togepi evolving to be really condensed significantly. All the extra stuff of making this a 2-part episode with this Mirage Kingdom and all these new characters and these Pokemon that are in danger and these new villains automatically detracted from the fact that there's a significant character returning for the story. You're too focused on everything else going on. And then it seems like the decision for the two to split up is not only abrupt, but also maybe pointless. I mean, in theory, these Togepi have existed in this kingdom since maybe the Middle Ages, considering they still have a kingdom, and for them to only need protection now does seem a little bit odd. Not only would it have felt more gratifying to see Misty depart with her own Togetic and see that she's continuing to grow while the series doesn't follow her, as she has a Gyarados and now a new Pokemon, they just decided, nah, it's okay, let's just write it off and send Misty away for fans to never really know what's happening for quite some time. I mean, Misty could have just stayed with Togetic, I guess, that could have worked, but apparently the gym leader duties are just way too important, far more important than her most important Pokemon, and overall this story just never sat well with the character and started off this big downhill trend whenever this character would in fact show up again. From there, every time Misty's character is brought back into the main series, it honestly was already set in the precedent that it would be a very underwhelming appearance. Later on, leading into the Battle Frontier, Misty joins up with the group again for 3 episodes, and while there are a couple of good moments and a little bit of maybe nostalgia thrown in there, the dynamic and chemistry between the group is just not at all the same as what it once was, and for the most part, Misty is just this ancillary character that exists for the sake of existing in these episodes and doesn't actually serve any purpose in either growing a character or developing a plot beyond what any character could develop or grow on their own. But she did replace her baby Pokemon with an Azurill, so she got over that quick. I don't know, in general, these episodes were weird, and then when they did the TV special with the Mirage Island, Misty comes back for that as well, and it just seems like, once again, with how action-packed this episode movie thing is, they just did a quick swap with having Misty as one of the female characters, and kind of just pushed Max and Brock to the sideline so that there was some room for Misty, which is okay, but once again, introducing Misty in an episode where there's a ton of other stuff going on doesn't really serve any good purpose for the character. And the team making the Pokemon anime probably realized that at this point, Misty was a character that's really hard to incorporate back into a series where they've completely replaced her already, and to find a dynamic where the character works isn't quite as easy. So we don't actually see Misty in the series for quite some time. In Diamond and Pearl, there's just a few cameo appearances and Easter eggs, and in Black and White, there's a brief flashback where you can see Misty in the background. Now, despite this complete destruction of a character, we would see Misty return in Pokemon the series Sun and Moon. And say what you will about that series, interestingly enough, Misty's return actually isn't handled that poorly. She appears in a couple episodes, but each episode not only reminds viewers why she was in the show in the first place, but goes back to establishing that Misty has grown a lot as a trainer and is now a very strong competitor. We see her battle in a way that had never been seen before, utilizing a Mega Gyarados, which insinuates that while Ash has continued to grow as a trainer, whether he actually has grown or not, Misty has been doing the same as well. And they talk even about how the gym has been so crazily busy. This little bit of information and the fact that later on they showcase the fact that Misty is an incredibly strong trainer is at least a better type of storyline than what we had seen previously before. Now lately, with the direction of the new series, Pokemon Journeys, fans have campaigned for the return of Misty to one day appear in the show again. Now, spoiler alert if you don't watch or keep up with what's going on in the show or the Japanese version of the show, but we do know that Dawn does make an appearance and comes back, which could possibly leave room for a character like Misty to return to the show as well. However, the one thing that fans would really want to see would maybe be a reunion between Misty and her Togetic, or maybe a Togekiss. They don't have to show the reunion itself, but I think for the sake of growth of the character and showing how things have changed over the years, even if they don't age, reuniting these two characters would not only show the power and growth of the character herself, but also be a really cool nod to original fans who watched the show all of those years back. But what are your thoughts? Do you think Misty was ruined as a character in those episodes we brought up earlier in this video? Let us know your thoughts. And for more Pokemon videos and discussions like this, make sure you subscribe with notifications on. That's it for today. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.